The sun clawed at the earth, relentless, turning the plains to a brittle crust beneath her feet. Dust coated her throat, each breath a rasp that tasted of iron and despair. Her dress, once blue as a summer sky, hung in tatters, stained with sweat and the blood of a wound she'd stopped feeling hours ago. The horizon shimmered, mocking her with promises of water that never came. She'd been walking since the wagon left her, its wheels creaking like a fading heartbeat. The driver's face blank as he turned away. No words, no reason, just her, alone with a half-empty canteen and a name scratched on a scrap of paper clutched in her fist. Eliza, that was all she had left. Her knees buckled, and she hit the ground hard, palms scraping against jagged stone. The sky above was a cruel blue, endless and indifferent, with buzzards drifting in slow, patient circles. She tried to stand, but her body refused, heavy as the grief she carried. Her fingers traced the dirt, searching for something, anything to hold on to. The canteen lay tipped beside her, its last drop soaking into the earth like an offering. She closed her eyes, and the world went quiet, save for the faint hum of heat and the distant thud of hooves. Real or imagined, she couldn't tell. Her lips moved, whispering a prayer she didn't believe in, and the darkness crept closer. When she awoke, the air was cool, heavy with the scent of hay and leather. She was no longer on the ground but lying on a rough blanket, the world swaying faintly beneath her. A barn, she realized, its rafters looming like the ribs of some great beast. Lantern light flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Her head throbbed, and her side burned where the wound had reopened, but she was alive. She tried to sit up, and a shadow moved, a man broad-shouldered, his face half hidden beneath a worn hat. He didn't speak, just watched her with eyes like polished flint, steady but guarded. A tin cup sat beside her, filled with water, and a plate of bread and salt pork. She stared at it, hunger warring with suspicion. He crouched, keeping his distance, and set a clean rag beside the cup. "You're safe," he said, voice low like gravel underfoot, "but you're hurt. Tend to it." His words weren't kind, but they weren't cruel either, just a statement, like he was naming the weather. She reached for the rag, her hands trembling, and pressed it to the gash on her side. The pain made her gasp, but she bit it back, not wanting him to see. He didn't move, just watched, his fingers resting on the handle of a knife at his belt. Not a threat, but a habit. The barn creaked as a gust swept through, carrying the faint howl of the plains outside. She thought of the wagon, the driver's back as he left her to die. The memory came sharp and unbidden, her brother's voice, promising a new start in Oregon, his hand warm in hers as they boarded the train months ago. She'd believed him, followed him across the country, only to watch him fade first into drink, then into silence, and finally into the dust of a trail that didn't want them. He'd been the one to hand her the canteen, to write the name on the paper. "Eliza, go to him, he'll take you in." But the man on the paper never came, and her brother was gone, and now she was here, in a stranger's barn, with nothing but her name and the weight of her mistakes. She looked at the man again, his face still unreadable. His hands were rough, scarred, the kind that knew work and loss in equal measure. He stood, turning toward the door, but paused when she whispered, "Why?" He didn't look back, just said, "Didn't seem right to leave you out there." The words hung in the air, simple and heavy, like stones dropped in a still pond. He stepped outside, leaving her with the lantern's glow and the sound of his boots fading into the night. She ate slowly, each bite a small rebellion against the emptiness inside her. The bread was stale, the pork tough, but it was life, and she clung to it. The wound stung as she cleaned it, but the bleeding had slowed. She lay back, staring at the rafters, the shadows shifting like memories she couldn't hold. The name on the paper caliburn in her mind. Was this him, or was he just another stranger, offering shelter for reasons she couldn't trust? The barn was quiet now, save for the soft snuffle of horses in their stalls. Outside, the wind sang its lonesome song, and she wondered if the plains would ever let her go. The night deepened, and the barn grew colder, the lantern's glow a small defiance against the dark. Eliza lay still, her breath shallow, each inhale tugging at the wound in her side. The blanket beneath her smelled of earth and horse, grounding her in a way the endless plains never had. She clutched the scrap of paper, its edges soft from her grip. The ink smudged, but the name still clear. Caleb. Her brother's handwriting, once bold, now seemed fragile, like a promise he couldn't keep. She closed her eyes, and the memory came again, sharp as a blade. She was 14, standing in the yard of their Ohio farm, the air thick with summer and the hum of cicadas. Her brother Thomas was laughing, tossing a stick for their old hound to chase. "We'll go west, Liza," he'd said, his eyes bright with dreams. "Land so wide you can't see the end of it. No more scrabbling in the dirt." She'd believed him, even when the farm failed, when their parents' graves grew weeds, when he started drinking. She followed him still, across rivers and railroads, because he was all she had. But the West wasn't kind. It took his smile, his hope, and finally him, leaving her with nothing but a name and a direction. The barn door creaked, pulling her back. The man returned, carrying a bucket of water and a clean shirt, its sleeves rolled like he'd been working. He set the bucket down, the water sloshing softly, and tossed the shirt beside her. "Yours is ruined," he said, nodding at her dress. His voice was still rough, but there was something softer in it now, like a crack in stone. She hesitated, then took the shirt, her fingers brushing the worn cotton. It smelled of soap and sun, and for a moment she wanted to weep for the simplicity of it. He sat across from her, leaning against a post, his hat tilted back to reveal a face weathered by years and loss. "Name's Caleb," he said, and her heart stuttered. She stared, the paper crumpling in her hand. He noticed, his eyes narrowing. "You've got something to say." She swallowed, her throat dry despite the water she'd drunk. "My brother, he told me to find you." The words felt like stones, heavy and sharp. Caleb's face didn't change, but his hand stilled on the knife at his belt. "Thomas," she added, her voice barely a whisper. "Thomas sent me." For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at the lantern as if it held answers. Then, "Thomas is dead." It wasn't a question, but she nodded, the weight of it pressing her down. "How'd he go?" Caleb asked, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. She told him haltingly of the fever, the way Thomas had burned up from the inside, muttering apologies as he slipped away. She didn't tell him about the nights she'd spent alone after, the way the trail had tried to break her too. Caleb listened, his eyes on the floor, and when she finished, he only nodded, like he'd known it all along. "He owed me," Caleb said finally, standing to adjust the lantern's wick. "Said he'd pay me back one day. Guess he thought sending you was enough." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a tired acceptance, like a man used to being owed things that never came. He looked at her then, really looked, and she felt exposed, her wounds and fears laid bare. "You stay till you're healed," he said, "then we'll see." He turned to leave, but she called out, "Why help me?" He paused, one hand on the doorframe. "Because I know what it's like to be left." She didn't sleep much that night, her mind tangled in memories and questions. The barn was alive with small sounds, horses shifting, mice skittering in the hay, the wind rattling. The walls. She thought of Thomas, his laugh fading into the dust. She thought of Caleb, his hand scarred like the land outside, offering her a shirt, a chance. The shirt was too big, but she pulled it on, the fabric warm against her skin. It felt like a promise, fragile and uncertain, but a promise all the same. By morning, the light crept through the barn's slats, painting the floor in gold and shadow. Caleb was there again, checking the horses, his movements steady and unhurried. He glanced at her, then away, as if giving her space to breathe. She stood, shaky but stronger, and felt something shift inside her, a small spark of something she hadn't felt in months. Not hope, not yet, but the possibility of it. Asterisk, asterisk, the morning air carried the bite of frost, though the sun was already climbing, casting long shadows across the barn floor. Eliza stood, the oversized shirt hanging loose on her frame, its sleeves brushing her knuckles. Her side ached, but the pain was duller now, a reminder she was still tethered to the world. Caleb was at the far end of the barn, forking hay into a stall, his movements rhythmic like a man who'd long since made peace with routine. The horses snorted softly, their breath clouding in the cool air. Outside, the plains stretched endless, their silence louder than any city she'd ever known. She stepped toward the door, her boots scuffing the dirt, and paused to watch him. His back was to her, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the pitchfork like it was an anchor. She wanted to ask about Thomas, about the debt he'd mentioned, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she said, "You got a house." Her voice sounded small, swallowed by the vastness of the barn. Caleb didn't turn, just kept working. "Close by," he said. "You'll see it when you're ready." He led her outside, the sunlight harsh after the dim barn. The ranch was modest, a low house of weathered wood, a corral with a few lean cattle, a windmill creaking lazily in the breeze. The land around it was unforgiving, all dust and scrub, with mountains faint on the horizon like a half-forgotten dream. He pointed to a trough by the house. "Water there. Clean yourself up. I'll bring something for the wound." He didn't wait for her reply, just walked off toward the house, his steps steady but heavy, like he carried more than his own weight. She knelt by the trough, the water cold enough to sting her hands. She splashed her face, the shock of it clearing her mind, and caught her reflection in the ripple's hollow cheeks, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She barely recognized herself. The girl who'd left Ohio with dreams of a new life was gone, replaced by this stranger, worn thin by the trail. She thought of Thomas again, his voice slurred by whiskey, promising her to a man she didn't know. "Caleb's good, Liza, he'll take care of you." She'd trusted him, even when he stopped being trustworthy. Now here she was, washing in a stranger's trough, wearing his shirt, with no path forward but the one he offered. Caleb returned with a tin of salve and a strip of clean cloth. He handed them to her without a word, then sat on a stump nearby, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. She applied the salve, wincing as it burned, and wrapped the cloth around her side. The act felt intimate, too personal under his quiet gaze, but he didn't look away, and she didn't ask him to. "You knew him long?" she asked finally, tying the cloth tight. Caleb's hand paused mid-stroke. "Long enough," he said. "Met him in Kansas. He was running from something even then." She wanted to ask more, but his tone was a closed door. Instead, she stood, testing her strength. The world didn't spin this time, and she took it as a small victory. Caleb noticed, his eyes flicking to her, then back to his knife. "You can walk, you can work," he said. "Help with the horses, earn your keep." It wasn't a question, but she nodded, grateful for the purpose, however small. She followed him to the corral, where a mare nosed the ground, her coat dusty but strong. Eliza brushed her, the motion familiar from childhood, her hands finding a rhythm that eased the ache in her chest. As the day wore on, she watched Caleb from the corner of her eye. He moved with a quiet certainty, speaking little, but his presence was steady, like the land itself. She wondered what he'd lost to make him so guarded, what debts he carried that weren't measured in coin. The sun climbed higher, baking the earth, and she felt the weight of her own past settling around her to miss his promises. The wagon's dust, the name on the paper, but here, in the rhythm of work, the brush against the mare's flank, she felt something else too, a thread of trust, thin as spider silk, tying her to this place, this man. By dusk, the sky was streaked with pink and gold, the plains softening under its glow. Caleb stood by the corral, watching the horizon, his hat low against the glare. She joined him, saying nothing, just letting the silence hold them both. For the first time in days, she didn't feel alone. The days blurred into a quiet rhythm, each one marked by the creak of the windmill and the soft thud of hooves on dry earth. Eliza's wound healed slowly, the pain easing into a dull ache she could ignore if she kept moving. She worked alongside Caleb, feeding the horses, mending fences, hauling water from the trough. Her hands grew calloused, her movements surer, as if the land was teaching her its own language. Caleb spoke little, but his presence was a constant, steady, unyielding, like the mountains that watched from afar. She caught herself studying him, the way his jaw tightened when he looked at the horizon, the faint scar above his brow, the careful way he handled the horses, as if they carried his secrets. One evening, as the sky burned red and the air turned cool, she found a small crate of her brother's things in the barn, tucked behind a stack of hay. A chipped mug, a worn Bible, a letter with her name scrawled on it. Her breath caught as she opened it. Thomas's handwriting, shaky but clear. "Liza, I failed you. Caleb's a better man than me. He'll keep you safe." The words stung, sharp, as the wind that had carried her here. She folded the letter, her fingers trembling, and slipped it into the pocket of Caleb's shirt, which she still wore. It felt like a confession she wasn't ready to share. That night, she sat by the corral, the stars sharp above the plains. Caleb joined her, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. He didn't sit, just stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at the same sky. "He never told me about you," Caleb said, his voice low, almost lost in the night. "He just said he had a debt, said he'd make it right." She looked up, her heart heavy. "He didn't know how," she said. "He tried, but the West broke him." Caleb nodded, his eyes distant. "Breaks most of us, one way or another." The silence stretched, heavy but not unkind. She wanted to ask about his own breaks, the losses that lingered in his silences, but she didn't. Instead, she said, "You don't owe me anything." He turned to her then, his gaze steady, searching. "Maybe I owe myself," he said. "Maybe I'm tired of losing things." The words hung between them, raw and unguarded, and she felt something shifted or cracking open, letting in a sliver of light. The next morning, he handed her a small ring, plain silver, worn smooth by time. "Found it in the house," he said, his voice gruff, avoiding her eyes. "Was my mother's. Ain't much, but it's yours if you want it." Her breath caught, not from the offer but from the weight of it, the trust, the risk, the quiet hope buried in his words. She took the ring, her fingers brushing his, and slipped it on. It was too big, but it felt right, like a piece of the land itself. She didn't say thank you. The look in her eyes said enough. They worked together that day, closer than before, their movements a silent conversation. She felt the ring's weight on her finger, a reminder of something she couldn't yet name. The plains stretched around them, vast and unyielding, but for the first time, they didn't feel like a cage. She thought of Thomas, his promises crumbling, like dust, and of Caleb, building something new from the ruins. She wasn't healed, not fully, but she was here, and that was enough. By dusk, they sat on the porch, the air thick with the scent of sage and earth. The sky was a deep indigo, the stars just beginning to pierce through. Caleb lit a lantern, its glow soft against the gathering dark. She looked at him, his face etched with lines of loss and resilience, and felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. Not love, not yet, but a quiet understanding, a shared weight that made the silence between them feel like home. The ring felt heavier each day, though its silver was thin and worn. Eliza turned it on her finger as she worked, the metal catching the light when she hauled water or brushed the horses. It was a quiet reminder of Caleb's offer, not just of the ring but of something larger, a place, a purpose, a chance to be more than a wanderer. The plains stretched around the ranch, their vastness no longer a threat but a canvas, painted with the slow rhythm of days spent mending fences and tending cattle. yet the weight of her past lingered, like dust that never quite settled. She caught herself watching Caleb more closely now, noting the way his hands moved with care, whether fixing a gate or pouring coffee from a dented pot. He didn't speak of the ring or what it meant, and she didn't ask. But there were moments his hand steadying her when she stumbled, his eyes lingering a second too long that felt like questions neither of them was ready to answer. The work filled the silence, but it couldn't erase the tension building between them, fragile as the first frost on the grass. One afternoon, a storm rolled in, the sky turning bruise purple, the air thick with the promise of rain. They were in the barn, securing the horses, when the first drops fell, heavy and cold. Caleb worked quickly, his movements sharp, as if the storm stirred something restless in him. Eliza followed his lead, her hand steady despite the ache in her side, now nearly healed. The rain came harder, drumming the roof, and a crack of thunder made the horses snort and paw. She glanced at Caleb, his face shadowed under his hat, and saw something raw in his eyes. Grief maybe, or fear. "Lost someone in a storm like this," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. He didn't look at her, just kept tying a rope around a post. "My sister, years back, tried to get home, but the river took her." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made her chest tighten. She wanted to reach for him, to offer something in return, but all she could say was, "I'm sorry." He nodded, the motion small, and kept working. The storm raged outside, but inside the barn, the air felt different, closer, charged with the truth they'd both been carrying that night. The rain slowed to a soft patter, and they sat in the house, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. Eliza held Thomas's letter, its edges worn from her touch. She hadn't shown it to Caleb, but now, with the storm's hum in the background, she felt the need to. She handed it to him, her fingers brushing his, and watched as he read, his face unreadable. When he finished, he folded it carefully, like it was something precious, and set it on the table. "He thought a lot of you," Caleb said, "more than he knew how to show." She nodded, her throat tight. "He was all I had, but he wasn't enough." The admission felt like a betrayal, but it was true. Caleb looked at her then, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen. "You're enough," he said, the words quiet but firm. "You're here. That's more than most can say." She felt the ring on her finger, its way to tether, and for the first time she let herself imagine staying, not just for survival, but for something more. The days that followed were quieter, the storms passing, leaving the air clean and sharp. Eliza felt the shift in herself, a slow unraveling of the fear that had kept her guarded. She and Caleb worked side by side, their silences comfortable now, their glances carrying a warmth that didn't need words. She wasn't running anymore, not from the plains or her past. The ring was a promise, not just from Caleb but to herself, to keep going, to build something new. The plains woke under a dawn that bled gold across the horizon, the air sharp with the scent of dew and sage. Eliza stood on the porch, her breath clouding in the chill, the ring glinting faintly on her finger. The land stretched before her, vast and unyielding, but it no longer felt like a weight pressing her down. She'd chosen to stay, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because the ranch, with its creaking windmill and stubborn horses, had begun to feel like hers. Caleb was already at work, his silhouette moving through the corral, a quiet anchor in the morning light. She thought of the crossroads she'd faced days ago, when the ring was still a question, when trust felt like a gamble she couldn't afford. She'd stood at the edge of the barn, watching Caleb mend a broken gate, and felt the pull of two paths, one leading back to the endless trail, alone with her grief, and the other here, with a man who offered not promises but presence. She'd chosen the latter, not out of desperation but because his silence held more truth than Thomas's dreams ever had. The ring wasn't a vow of love, it was too soon for that, but a tether to something real, something she could build on. Now, as she carried water to the horses, her steps were lighter, her hands steadier. The wound in her side was little more than a scar, a faint reminder of the miles she'd walked to get here. Caleb worked nearby, his hat low, his hands guiding, a colt with a patience that made her chest ache. She saw his losses in the lines of his face, the sister taken by the river, the years spent carving a life from this unforgiving land. They didn't speak of it, but the shared weight of their pasts bound them like roots beneath the soil. By midday, the sun was high, the heat softening the edges of the world. They sat on the porch, sharing a canteen, the silence between them warm and easy. She thought of Thomas's letter, now tucked in a drawer, its words no longer a wound but a memory. Caleb followed her gaze to the horizon where the mountains stood like sentinels. "You ever think of leaving?" he asked, his voice low, not accusing but curious. She turned the ring on her finger, feeling its weight. "Thought about it," she said, "but this feels closer to home than anywhere I've been." He nodded, his eyes softening, and for a moment she saw the man beneath the scars, a man who'd lost but hadn't stopped building, who'd offered her a ring not to claim her but to share what little he had. She reached for his hand, her fingers brushing his, and he didn't pull away. The touch was small, but it carried the weight of everything they hadn't said. As dusk settled, the sky turned to ash and amber, The plains quiet save for the soft hum of crickets. They stood by the corral, watching the horses settle, their breaths rising in faint clouds. The wind was gentle now, carrying the scent of earth and possibility. Eliza felt the ring on her finger, its silver warmed by her skin, and thought of the dust that had once coated her throat, the cracked earth that had tried to claim her. She'd been left behind, abandoned to the mercy of the plains. But she'd found her way here, to a place where the silence held warmth, where the land didn't have to break her. Caleb stood beside her, his shoulder close enough to feel his warmth, and she knew this was enough, not a grand redemption, but a quiet one, built from small gestures and shared silences. The plains stretched before them, endless and unchanged, but she no longer saw them as a curse. They were just the earth, waiting for her to claim her place on it.